The snow had been piling up since dawn, thick as a preacher's hypocrisy, swallowing the Dalton homestead whole. Out in the Montana wilderness, storms didn't just pass through, they settled in like unwelcome in-laws, testing a man's patience and his roof's integrity. The wind screamed through the pines, shaking the cabin like a drunk at closing time. Inside, Elias Dalton sat by the fire, stitching a torn saddlebag with hands rougher than a badger's hide. At 42, he wore his silence like a second skin carved out by the kind of grief that came with burying his wife 3 winters back. Left to raise 2 boys in a land where even the coyotes had the sense to hunker down. The fire crackled, painting the log walls in flickering gold. Behind him, his youngest Caleb, 8 and sharp as a tack, whittled a stick into nothing useful, while his brother Jesse, 10, and serious beyond his years, traced words in the family Bible with a finger blackened by charcoal. Elias had chosen this life deliberately. No neighbors, no chatter, just the raw bite of the frontier. Quiet meant control. But that evening, as the stew pot simmered, the storm's tune changed. A knock came, not the bold rap of a trapper or the frantic pounding of a lost soul, but something in between, like a ghost testing its luck. Elias's hand drifted toward the Sharps rifle leaning by the door. The boys went still as hunted rabbits. The knock came again, weaker this time, followed by a thud. Elias cracked the door open, and the wind nearly took his beard off. There she stood, a woman, wrapped in a tattered Navajo blanket, her bare feet blue as a midwinter moon. Her lips were split from cold, but her eyes sharp as a hawk's locked onto his. "I can mend," she whispered, swaying like a sapling in a gale. "I'll tend your boys. Just let me in." Then she folded like a bad hand of cards. Elias caught her before she hit the porch. She weighed less than a sack of flour, all bones and desperation. Every instinct told him to leave her be. Strangers brought trouble, and trouble in Montana had a habit of multiplying. But Jesse was already on his feet, his voice steady. "Pa," he said, nodding to the woman's bleeding feet. "She's got no tracks behind her, like she walked out of thin air." Elias carried her inside, laying her by the fire. Her feet were a mess. Cuts, frostbite, the works. He wrapped them in strips of burlap, rubbing life back into them while Caleb fetched the whiskey. "Stay back," Elias warned. But the boys edged closer, curiosity burning brighter than the hearth. The woman groaned, her fingers twitching toward Jesse's sleeve. "You've got her eyes," she murmured, delirious. "Your ma's." Elias froze. His wife's name had never left this cabin since the day they buried her. The boys exchanged a glance, and in that moment the wind outside died clean away, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. Elias studied Mara's face as she slept, the firelight carving shadows under her cheekbones. The boys had finally dozed off, Jesse still gripping the Bible like a talisman, Caleb curled up with his whittling knife clutched in his small fist. The storm outside had turned the windows into sheets of white noise, but inside the air hummed with something Elias couldn't name not yet. He reached for the whiskey bottle, then stopped. A man needed a clear head with strangers under his roof. Mara stirred just before dawn, her fingers twitching against the blanket. When her eyes opened, they weren't wild anymore, just tired. Deep down, bone-tired. Elias handed her a tin cup of broth without a word. She drank it slow, like she was measuring each sip. "Sundown Ridge is a hard place to leave," he said, finally watching her, "especially in winter." Her knuckles whitened around the cup. "Wasn't my choice," Elias grunted. Choices were a luxury out here. He'd learned that when the fever took his Sarah. The silence stretched thick as the snow piling against the door. Then Caleb, sharp-eared, even half asleep, piped up from his cot. "You really walked 20 miles barefoot?" Mara's mouth quirked the ghost of a smile. "Had to outrun the wolves." Jesse sat bolt upright. "Wolves! Metaphorical ones, she said, but Elias saw the way her gaze flicked to the door like she expected something or someone to come crashing through it. That's when he noticed the faint bruise circling her wrist, half hidden by the blanket. A man's handprint. His gut tightened. The wind shrieked like a wounded animal and the lantern flickered. Mara's voice dropped low, just for Elias. "They'll come looking. Men like that always do." Elias stood the chair scraping loud against the floorboards. He walked to the window, though all he could see was his own reflection, a face hardened by years of fighting land and weather and grief. "Let 'em try," he said, and the quiet fury in his voice made Jesse's eyes go wide. "This ain't Sundown Ridge." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something new took root. Not just warmth, but the first faint spark of defiance. Mara exhaled long and slow, like she'd been holding her breath for years. Then she reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small, crumpled photograph, edges frayed from handling. A little girl, maybe 5, with Jesse's same serious eyes. "My daughter," she whispered. They kept her. The cabin went dead, silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Elias looked at his boys, really looked, and saw the understanding dawning in their faces. This wasn't just about shelter anymore. Somewhere out there in the white hell, a child was waiting. Caleb, ever the practical one, broke the silence first. "We got an extra horse," he said like it was settled. And just like that, the Dalton homestead wasn't the end of the road anymore. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Elias set his coffee cup down with a thud, the sound sharp in the quiet cabin. Mara didn't flinch. She just kept kneading the salve into her cracked feet, her movements methodical, like she'd done this 100 times before. The cinnamon scent hung in the air, Sarah's old remedy. He hadn't smelled it in years. "You stole that from my wife's tin," he said, voice low. Mara's hand stilled. "I'll replace it?" "Not the point." His jaw tightened. That tin had been tucked away in the highest cupboard, untouched since the funeral. Across the room, Jesse stiffened, sensing the shift in the air. Caleb, ever the peacemaker, piped up. She fixed the stovepipe paw, was whistling like a train before. Elias ignored him, eyes locked on Mara. "You're handy, I'll give you that. But handy folks don't turn up barefoot in a blizzard with no story worth telling." The fire popped. Outside, a tree limb cracked under the weight of snow. Mara lifted her gaze, and for the first time, Elias saw something flicker behind those calm eyes, not fear, but calculation, like a gambler counting cards. "You're right," she said simply. Reaching into her dress pocket, she slid a rusted sheriff's badge across the table. The star was bent one point, snapped clean off. Jesse sucked in a breath. Caleb scrambled closer, eyes wide. "Found that in the snow 2 miles east," Mara said. "Same direction your smoke was blowing yesterday." She tapped the broken point. "This wasn't weather damage. That's a bullet strike." Elias's blood ran colder than the storm outside. Sheriff Taggart was due to ride through last week. A good man. A friend. Mara leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's 3 men holed up in the old mining shack near Dead Man's Gulch. One's got a Navy Colt with notches filed into the grip." The room seemed to tilt. Elias knew that gun. Knew the bastard who carried it. Caleb, oblivious to the tension, tugged at Mara's sleeve. "How'd you see all that?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Because, boy, I was supposed to be their 4th. The confession hung in the air like gunsmoke. Elias's hand drifted toward his rifle. Mara didn't move, just held his stare, waiting. Then Jesse, quiet, bookish, Jesse spoke up from the shadows. "But you didn't shoot the sheriff." It wasn't a question. Mara turned to him, her face softening. "No, son, I shot the man who did." The wind howled through the eaves, carrying with it the distant metallic creak of the homestead gate swinging open. Someone was out there. Elias stood so fast his chair toppled over. "Caleb, bolt the shutters. Jesse, load the Spencer. He tossed Mara his backup Colt. You any good with that? She caught it one-handed, spinning the cylinder with practiced ease. Better'n you, cowboy. Outside a horse whinnied, then another. Too many for friendly visitors. The storm had brought more than snow tonight. It had brought reckoning. The morning sun cut sharp across the snow, turning the yard into a field of broken glass. Elias stood at the window watching Mara chop wood with a rhythm that spoke of years doing the same. Her breath came in white puffs, her borrowed boots, his late wife's leaving deep prints in the snow. She'd refused to stay idle, even with her feet still healing. Caleb pressed his nose against the frosty pane. She swings that axe better'n you, Pa. Jesse elbowed him, but Elias just grunted. The boy wasn't wrong. There was a story in the way she worked, shoulders squared, no wasted motion. This wasn't just some school marm who'd gotten crosswise with a preacher. Inside the smell of baking bread mixed with the sharp tang of pine pitch, Jesse was melting for glue. Mara had kneaded the dough before dawn, her fingers remembering what her mind might have wanted to forget. Now she paused mid-swing, axe hovering as 3 riders emerged from the tree line. Elias's hand found his rifle before he realized he'd moved. The lead rider's bay mare had the telltale Lazy S brand Sundown Ridge's biggest spread. Mara didn't run. Just set the axe down slow and deliberate like she'd been expecting this. The foreman, a brute with a scar through his eyebrow, reined up 10 paces out. Well, I'll be damned. The runaway can swing an axe. His gaze slid to Elias. This your woman now, Dalton? Elias stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under his weight. My house, my rules. State your business, Harkin. Harkin spat tobacco, the brown stain melting a hole in the snow. Reverend's offering a reward for stolen property. He jerked his chin at Mara. That there's mission school issue. He held up a pair of battered shoes. These look familiar, schoolteacher. Mara's face went still as stone. I earned those. Funny. Harkin grinned, showing teeth like a wolf's. Reverend says you stole 'em, along with some books, and his silver cross. Elias saw the lie for what it was, an excuse to drag her back, maybe punish her for knowing too much. But it was Jesse who spoke first, his voice cracking with outrage. She wouldn't steal, she's been teaching us Latin. The riders laughed. Harkin leaned forward in his saddle. Ain't that sweet? But grown folks is talking boy. His hand dropped to his revolver. Mara moved then, not toward the riders, but to stand beside Elias, close enough that their sleeves brushed. When she spoke, her voice carried clear across the frozen yard. The only thing I took from that place was knowledge, and last I checked, even Reverend Mathis can't copyright the Lord's Prayer. A muscle jumped in Harkin's jaw. The other riders shifted, sensing the play wasn't going as planned. Elias thumbed back the hammer on his Winchester. The click echoed like a judge's gavel. You got 3 seconds to turn those horses around. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Harkin's smile returned uglier than before. This ain't over, school marm. The Reverend's got long arms. As they rode out the last rider, a pockmarked kid no older than Jesse tossed something into the snow. A tattered primer with Apache children's names inked inside the cover. Mara didn't move to retrieve it, just stood there trembling, not from cold, but from something deeper. Elias knew the feeling, the fury of a man watching vultures circle something still breathing. That night, as the boys slept, Mara sat at the table, mending Jesse's torn coat by lamplight. Elias set a tumbler of whiskey beside her. You never mentioned the cross. She pulled a small silver pendant from her bodice, not a cross, but a crescent moon entwined with a cross. My grandmother's. From the Lipan side. Her needle flashed in the light. The Reverend called it pagan filth, tried to burn it. Outside, the wind picked up whispering through the pines like old ghosts. Elias downed his whiskey in one burn. Harkin'll be back with more than 3 men next time. Mara tied off her thread with a surgeon's precision. I know. They sat in silence. Then 2 survivors reading the storm signs. The cabin walls had never felt so thin, the night so full of teeth. Somewhere out there the Reverend's justice was coming, and it wouldn't care who stood in its way. The candle between them flickered, casting long shadows that danced like spirits on the log walls. Elias's grip tightened on the almanac, the pages crinkling under his fingers. That tiny flame felt like a challenge, a spark of something foreign in the home he'd built with his own hands, the home where Sarah's memory still lingered in every corner. Mara didn't blow it out, just watched him with those unreadable dark eyes. "It's just light," she said softly. "Same as your lantern." Elias's voice came out rougher than he intended. "My lantern don't come with heathen prayers." A floorboard creaked. Jesse stood in the doorway, his nightshirt hanging loose, eyes wide in the candlelight. "Pa, what's happening?" Before Elias could answer, Mara cupped her hand around the flame, not snuffing it, but shielding it. "Nothing, child. Just talking." Jesse didn't move. "Mama used to light candles, too. When the storms came," the words hit Elias like a buck kick to the chest. Sarah had done just that, whispering old Scottish rhymes her grandmother taught her. Protection against the dark, she'd called it. He'd always teased her for it. Mara's gaze never left Elias's face. "Smart woman, your mama." The wind chose that moment to rattle the shutters, howling down the chimney and making the fire spit. The little candle flame quivered, but held. Somewhere outside, a branch snapped like a gunshot. Caleb appeared behind his brother, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Why's everybody up?" Elias exhaled through his nose. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then he reached past Mara, and instead of dousing the candle, lit the lantern beside it with the same match. The sudden glow filled the room, outshining the smaller flame, but not extinguishing it. "Back to bed," he told the boys. "Storm's picking up again." As they shuffled away, Mara finally moved, tucking the candle stub back into her pouch. But Elias caught her wrist. Not roughly, but firm enough to feel the scars beneath his fingers, old burns in parallel lines. Branding marks. His thumb brushed over them before he could stop himself. "Schoolteachers don't get these?" Mara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "No, but runaway indentured servants do." The truth landed between them like a live coal. Elias released her arm. The unspoken questions hung heavy: who'd owned her, how she'd gotten free. Why a woman with those marks would risk showing her face at a mission school. Outside, the storm redoubled its fury, snow pelting the roof like buckshot. The lantern light wavered as a particularly vicious gust shook the cabin. Mara stood abruptly, wincing, as her half-healed feet took her weight. "I'll check the shutters." Elias watched her limp toward the window, that stubborn candle still burning in her pouch. He thought of Sarah's rhymes, of Jesse's quiet faith in this stranger, of the way Caleb had started leaving wildflowers on Mara's cot every morning. When the next gust came, it blew open the latch on the east shutter. Mara caught it before it could slam her hands, working quick in the freezing wind. Elias moved to help, and that's when he saw them. 3 riders emerging from the tree line, their horses struggling through the deepening snow. Not Harkin this time. These men wore long dusters and moved with the deliberate pace of those who knew they wouldn't be turned away. The leader's badge glinted in the stormlight. Mara went still as a hunted rabbit. "Reverend's brother," she whispered. "Marshal Cole." Elias felt the pieces click into place. The stolen cross accusation. The branding marks. This wasn't about theft. This was about property. He grabbed his shotgun from the rack and pressed it into Mara's hands. Her fingers closed around the stock with practiced ease. "Take the boys to the root cellar," he said. "Don't come up till I call." Mara hesitated only a second before nodding. But as she turned, Elias caught her arm again. "Leave the candle burning." Her eyes flashed with something fierce and grateful. Then she was gone, moving silent as shadow toward the boys' room, while Elias stepped onto the porch to meet the law. The marshal's voice carried over the wind. "Evening, Dalton. Heard you've been harboring a thief?" Elias spat into the snow. "Heard wrong." Behind him, through the cabin window, the candle flame held steady, small, defiant, and burning brighter than ever. The axe handle creaked under Elias's grip as Cole's boys shifted in their saddles, their breath fogging the crisp morning air. Behind him, the cabin door opened just enough for Mara to slip out, not cowering, but standing square-shouldered in the sunlight, her borrowed wool coat hanging loose over Will's old shirt and trousers. Cole's grin widened. "Well, hell, Mill Rat was right for once." Elias didn't blink. "She's under my roof." That a fact? Cole leaned forward, his saddle leather groaning. "Funny thing, Reverend Mathis, over at Sundown's missing some silver, and a schoolteacher." His eyes raked over Mara. "Though this one looks more breed than teacher to me." A muscle jumped in Elias's jaw. He'd known Cole since they were boys. Throwing rocks at tin cans, knew exactly how this dance went. The Reverend Silver was just an excuse. This was about a half-Cherokee woman daring to walk away from men who thought they owned her. Mara spoke before Elias could. "The Reverend's cross is right where he left it, nailed above the schoolhouse door." Her voice carried clear across the yard. No tremor, no fear. "As for the silver, ask Harkin what he trades at the Comanchero camp every full moon." Cole's face darkened. One of his men, a pockmarked kid with nervous fingers, reached for his revolver. Elias shifted his grip on the axe. "You pull that iron, son, you best use it." The kid froze. Cole spat again, the tobacco juice staining the snow like blood. "Always was soft for strays, weren't you, Dalton? Remember that spotted hound you tried to save after the mine collapse?" He chuckled. "Put it down yourself in the end." Behind Elias, Mara went very still. But it was Jesse who broke the silence, bursting from the cabin with Caleb on his heels, the old Spencer rifle wobbling in his hands. "You leave her alone." Cole's laugh died in his throat. The Spencer might be ancient, but at this range, it would punch through a man clean as a hot knife through butter. Elias didn't turn around. "Jesse, take your brother inside." "But Pa..." Now, the boys retreated, but the door stayed open. Mara hadn't moved. Cole wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "This ain't over, Dalton. That woman's got a price on her head, and I aim to collect." He reined his horse around, kicking up clods of snow. "1 week, then I come back with a posse." As the riders disappeared into the trees, Elias finally exhaled. His palms ached where the axe handle had bitten into them. Mara stepped forward, her voice low. "I'll go, tonight." Elias turned to face her. The morning sun caught the flecks of gold in her dark eyes that held no plea, just grim acceptance. Like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. He studied the cabin behind her where 2 small faces peered through the window. Thought of Jesse's shaking hands on that rifle, of Caleb leaving flowers by Mara's bed, of the way she'd saved that frost-bitten hen with nothing but patience and warm rags. "No," he said at last, hefting the axe onto his shoulder. "We'll go together, all of us." Mara blinked. "What?" Elias nodded toward the barn. "Got a wagon needs mending, and a chest buried under the feed sack, Sarah's grandfather's Sharps rifle. Killed Comanche raiders with it back in '58. He met her gaze. "You any good with long guns?" For the first time since she'd stumbled into his life, half frozen, Mara looked truly startled. Then something kindled in her eyes, not gratitude, but something fiercer. "Better than you with that axe, old man." Elias snorted. "We'll see." As they walked toward the barn, the winter sun glinted off something metal in the snow, the bent primer the riders had tossed days ago. Mara picked it up, brushing off the ice. The names inside were smudged, but legible Apache children's names written in careful script. She tucked it into her coat pocket as Elias threw open the barn doors. The wagon sat there dusty, but solid. Big enough for 4. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk. Storm coming, but not today. Today they had work to do. The cold bit deep as Elias led them single file through the black pines, each step crunching in the frozen snow. Mara carried Will piggyback the boy's face buried in her hair, while Jesse clung to his father's coat sleeve like a lifeline. Behind them, the cabin stood dark and empty, a decoy. They'd gone half a mile when Mara suddenly froze her hand, snapping up in warning. Elias followed her gaze to the ridge above them. A flicker of orange, then another. Torches. "Cole's not waiting till morning," Mara whispered. Elias swore under his breath. The old mining tunnel was another mile east, but the boys were already shivering. He crouched, meeting Jesse's wide eyes. "Remember that hollow cottonwood by the creek?" Jesse nodded. "The one with the bees last summer. Bees'll be asleep. Take your brother there. Stay quiet as church mice." He pressed his skinning knife into Jesse's hand. "Don't use this unless you have to." As the boys vanished into the shadows, Mara touched Elias's arm. "They're burning your home." Flames licked up the barn roof, now casting monstrous shadows across the snow. Elias's jaw worked. That barn had stood 20 years, had held Sarah's laughter, the boys' first steps. Let it burn. He grabbed Mara's hand. "Come on." They moved northwest toward the sound of rushing water. The ice near the creek bank groaned under their weight as they slid into the frigid shallows. The water numbed Elias's legs instantly, but it would hide their scent from any tracking dogs. Mara gasped as the current tugged at her skirts. "Where are we?" A gunshot cracked the night air. Then a voice bellowed from the ridge, "Dalton, we know you're down there." Elias shoved Mara behind a boulder just as another shot ricocheted off the stone. Splinters of rock stung his cheek. He palmed his Colt counting shadows in the torchlight. 5, maybe 6 men. Too many. Mara's breath came fast beside him. "They'll flank us." Even as she spoke, Elias heard the crunch of boots downstream. Trapped. He thumbed back the hammer when a high keening wail cut through the night. Not human, not animal. The sound raised the hair on Elias's neck. The gunfire stopped. "What in God's name?" one of Cole's men whispered. Then the trees exploded with movement. Dark shapes flowed down the slope like liquid shadow. Not wolves. Not quite. The largest creature paused at the water's edge, yellow eyes reflecting torchlight. A massive gray wolf, its muzzle streaked with silver. Mara went rigid. "Tsula," she breathed. The wolf's ears pricked at the name. For one impossible second it looked straight at Mara, then vanished into the night, its pack following in silent unison. Cole's men broke like quail before a hawk, their torches tumbling into the snow as they fled. Within seconds, the woods fell still again. Elias turned to Mara. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady. "You know that wolf." She stared at the empty tree line. "My mother's people say Tsula walks with those about to cross over." A faint smile touched her lips. "Guess he chose the wrong side tonight." Dawn found them huddled in the mine shaft, the boys asleep in a nest of dry grass. Outside, the first birds began to sing. Elias watched Mara trace the carved bird Will had given her fingers, moving like she was memorizing every curve. "We can't stay in Montana," he said at last. Mara nodded. "Colorado's got good land and better laws." Elias studied her profile in the dim light. The stubborn set of her jaw, the quiet strength in her shoulders. A woman who'd walked through hell barefoot and come out standing. He thought of the wolf's knowing eyes, of Jesse's courage, of how Caleb had looked at Mara like she hung the moon. He reached into his coat, pulling out the charred primer he'd salvaged from the cabin ruins. The Apache children's names were still legible. "You'll need this," he said, "for the new school." Mara's fingers closed around the book. Somewhere outside, a lone wolf howled, not a dirge, but a promise. The sun rose higher, painting the canyon walls in gold. Time to move. Elias reined in his horse, the old mare blowing steam through her nostrils. The silver-haired woman didn't rise from her chair, just studied him with eyes that seemed to peel back layers of his soul. A Winchester leaned against the doorframe within easy reach. "Late for what?" he asked, hand resting on his own rifle. The woman smiled, revealing teeth worn smooth as river stones. "For her reckoning." She nodded toward the shack. "She's inside. Been waiting 3 days." Elias dismounted slow, every sense alert. The place smelled of sage and wood smoke, with an undercurrent of something bitter medicine brewing. As he stepped onto the porch, the old woman blocked his path with a gnarled walking stick. "Not yet," she said. "First you answer. That boy of yours, the quiet one, he carry your wife's eyes or yours?" The question hit like a gut punch. Elias's fingers twitched. "Jesse's got Sarah's eyes. Why?" The woman hummed, satisfied. "Good. Means she told the truth." She lowered the stick. "Go on, then. But mind the threshold." "This ain't your house." The shack's interior glowed with lamplight. Mara sat at a rough-hewn table, her injured feet propped on a stool wrapped in poultice-stained cloth. She looked up when he entered, exhaustion, and something like hope warring in her face. Behind her, a faded Navajo blanket hung on the wall, its geometric patterns shimmering in the firelight. Elias stopped dead. That blanket he'd seen its twin years ago wrapped around a Comanchero's shoulders during a skirmish near Santa Fe. Mara followed his gaze. "My grandmother's," she said quietly. "Only thing I own that nobody could steal." The old woman snorted from the doorway. "Except you let them take it, girl. Let them take near everything." She shuffled to the hearth, stirring a bubbling pot. "Till now." Elias took a step forward. "Cole's men never came back. Place is safe." Mara's laugh was bitter. "For how long? A week? A month?" She gestured to her swollen feet. "I won't run again. Can't." The old woman slammed her ladle against the pot. "Enough belly aching." She fixed Elias with a stare. "You rode all this way. Say what you came to say." The words stuck in Elias's throat. He'd planned speeches the whole ride, practical arguments about winter supplies, the boys needing her, the cabin repairs. But what came out was, "Toby's making a mess of his stitches. And Jesse," he swallowed hard. "Jesse asked if you'd teach him to read Cherokee like his ma used to." Mara's breath caught. Outside, the wind moaned through the canyon. The old woman muttered something in a language Elias didn't know, then thrust a steaming cup into his hands. "Drink, then take your woman home." Mara's head snapped up. "Auntie, don't auntie me." The woman tapped Mara's injured foot with her stick, making her yelp. "You think Tsula showed his face for nothing." She turned to Elias, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That wolf hasn't walked this land since my sister died. He came for her." She pointed at Mara. "And he came for you." Elias's skin prickled. He thought of those yellow eyes in the dark, the way the gunman had fled, the way his boys had looked at Mara like she hung the moon. He set the cup down untouched and held out his hand. "Wagon's outside. Got fresh straw in back." Mara hesitated only a second before reaching for him. Her fingers were warm and rough and exactly right. The old woman cackled as they stepped onto the porch. "About damn time." She tossed a small bundle after them, the Navajo blanket carefully folded. "For the children," she said, then softer, "and for the wolf." As they rode north toward home, the first snowflakes of a new storm began to fall. Mara leaned against Elias's shoulder, the blanket wrapped tight around them both. Somewhere in the distance, a lone howl echoed through the pines. Not a warning this time, but a welcome. The wind carried Jesse's carved bird where it hung from Mara's neck, spinning slowly on its cord. A talisman against nightmares, a promise of mornings to come. The dawn came sharp and red over the desert, painting the adobe walls in bloodlight. Elias stirred as the first rays touched his face, Mara's head still heavy on his shoulder. The storm had blown itself out in the night, leaving the air clean and brittle. The old woman was already up grinding cornmeal on a stone metate. She didn't look up as Elias stretched the kinks from his back. "You'll need this," she said suddenly, sliding a leather pouch across the floor. Inside lay a single bullet, its lead tip carved with strange markings. Elias turned it in his fingers. "What's this for? The wolf won't always be there to chase your troubles?" She nodded to the rifle leaning by the door. "That one's for Cole. When he comes again, and he will you put it between his eyes. Or you'll spend the rest of your days looking over your shoulder." Mara sat up, the blanket pooling around her waist. "Auntie, quiet girl." The old woman fixed Elias with a stare. "You took her hand. That makes her yours. That makes her boys yours. You think words matter more than blood." She spat into the fire. "White men and their papers." Elias pocketed the bullet. He didn't believe in magic, but he believed in promises. And the weight of this one settled in his bones, like gravity. They rode out as the sun climbed. Mara perched behind Elias on the mare, her arms tight around his waist. The desert gave way to scrubland, then to the first stunted pines marking Montana territory. Somewhere ahead lay home, what was left of it. Near midday, they stopped to water the horse at a seep spring. Mara crouched in the shallows, scrubbing trail dust from her face. That's when Elias saw them, fresh hoof prints in the mud-shod horses, at least 4 riders. Recent. Mara followed his gaze. Her hand went to the knife at her belt. "Not Cole's men," she murmured. "Their horses drag their left hind foot. These don't." Elias studied the tracks closer. She was right. These riders moved different, purposeful, not meandering, and headed straight for his land. They mounted up quick, cutting cross-country through the pines. Elias pushed the mare harder than he should have, but the dread coiling in his gut left no room for caution. The cabin came into view as they crested the last ridge. No smoke rose from the chimney. No boys came running. Just an eerie stillness broken by the creak of the unlatched barn door swinging in the wind. Mara's grip on his waist tightened. Then he saw it. Nailed to the porch post, a sheet of paper, flapping in the breeze. Even from this distance, the crude drawing was clear, a wolf with its throat cut. Elias was off the horse before it fully stopped, his boots kicking up dust as he ran for the house. The door stood ajar. Inside, the table was overturned, flour sacks slid open. And in the center of the wreckage, a single playing card, the ace of spades, pinned to the floor, with Jesse's whittling knife. Mara's breath came fast behind him. "Comancheros," she whispered. "They mark houses this way. Means they'll trade." Elias's vision tunneled. He knew what they traded in. Then a sound cut through the silence, a high, thin whistle from the trees. The same 2-note call Jesse used to summon Caleb home for supper. They found the boys in the root cellar, hidden under a pile of burlap sacks. Jesse clutched the Spencer rifle, his face streaked with dirt and tears. Caleb peeked out from behind his brother Will's carved bird, clutched in his fist. 3 men came at dawn. Jesse said, his voice shaking but clear. "We hid like you taught us." He swallowed hard. "They took the chickens, and they left that card." Elias pulled them both into a crushing hug. Over Jesse's shoulder, his eyes met Mara's. Her face was stone, but her hands trembled. That night, as the boys slept fitfully in the rebuilt cabin, Elias cleaned his guns at the table. Mara sat across from him, sharpening her knife with long, sure strokes. The old woman's bullet lay between them, gleaming in the lamplight. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the distant cry of a wolf. Not Tsula this time, just an ordinary beast singing to the moon. Mara tested the knife's edge against her thumb. "We can't run," she said softly. Elias nodded, sliding the marked bullet into his rifle's chamber. Never again. The candle between them burned steady, its flame undisturbed by the drafts. No prayers this time. Just silence and steel and the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the air. Some storms you don't wait out. You walk straight into them. The first Sunday of spring, Mara woke to the sound of hammering. She pulled on her boots and stepped outside to find Elias kneeling by the pasture fence, wrestling with a crooked post. The boys were nowhere in sight. "Where are church?" Elias grunted, not looking up. "Took the wagon into town." Mara froze. Church meant people. People meant questions. She touched the scar on her wrist absently. Elias finally glanced at her, his face unreadable. "Figured you'd want a quiet morning." He nodded toward the barn. "Got something to show you." Inside, bathed in dusty sunlight, stood a sturdy oak desk. Its surface was sanded smooth, the edges carved with intricate whorls that mirrored the patterns on her grandmother's blanket. A school desk. Mara's throat tightened. "Elias, boys and I worked on it nights." He ran a hand over the wood. "Figured if you're staying, you ought to have a proper place to teach, not just my boys." He met her eyes. "Any child that needs learning." The implication hung between them Apache children, Mexican children, the ones no one else would teach. Mara traced the carvings with trembling fingers. Outside, a meadowlark sang its piercing song. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a wagon creaked along the muddy road, the boys returning. Elias cleared his throat. "Reverend's brother won't trouble us again." Mara looked up sharply. "Found him face down in Sundown Creek last week." Elias's voice was flat. Bullet between his shoulders. Same markings as that coin old woman gave me. The unspoken truth settled over them. Tsula's justice. Will's voice carried across the yard as the wagon pulled in. "Mara, we brought licorice." Elias moved toward the door, pausing just long enough to squeeze her shoulder. "Welcome home, school marm." That evening, as fireflies blinked to life in the pasture, Mara sat at her new desk, carefully inscribing names in the primer's margin: Toby, Will, Jesse, Caleb, and beneath them in delicate Cherokee script, Tsula. Family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was the people who stayed. The lantern burned late that night, its glow spilling from the barn like a beacon. And if anyone noticed the lone wolf watching from the tree-line, yellow eyes gleaming in the dark, no one mentioned it. Some stories didn't need telling. They just were. The first time the baby kicked Elias was mending harness leather by the fire. Mara gasped so suddenly that Jesse dropped his reader and Caleb scrambled to her side, eyes wide. "Was it the baby?" Caleb whispered, pressing his small hand against her rounded belly. "Can I feel?" Mara guided his fingers to the spot. They waited, breath held, until the tiny flutter came again. Caleb's face lit up like sunrise. "It's like a butterfly in a jar." Elias set aside his work, his calloused hands hesitating before reaching out. When the kick came under his palm, something raw flashed across his face, a mix of wonder and grief for the child Sarah never got to hold. Mara's fingers laced through his. No words needed. That Sunday, Elias rode into town alone. He returned with a pine cradle strapped to the saddle, its wood sanded smooth as river stone. "Found it at the mercantile," he muttered, avoiding her eyes as he carried it inside. Mara ran her fingers over the carvings, tiny wolves, chasing their tails along the headboard. She recognized Jesse's careful handiwork. The boys crowded around as Elias set the cradle near the hearth. "It's for all of us," Jesse said solemnly. "Our baby, our baby." The words hung in the air, binding them tighter than any bloodline. That night, as a spring storm rumbled in the distance, Elias lay awake listening to the wind. Mara's breathing was steady beside him, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Outside the new schoolhouse stood half-finished, its fresh pine boards gleaming in the moonlight. Come morning, they'd raise the roof beams. Come fall, the first students would arrive, ranch kids, miners' children, maybe even a few Apache youngsters from the nearby settlement. Elias turned his face into Mara's hair, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and sage. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a lone wolf howled. Not a warning this time, but a promise carried on the wind. The West wasn't just about surviving, it was about building. And as the first drops of rain pattered against the roof, Elias finally understood. Some storms didn't pass, they watered the earth and made things grow. The fire's burning low now, friends, but the stories never end. If this tale of second chances and hard-won belonging kindled something in you, maybe reminded you of your granddad's ranch, or that stubborn aunt who could weather any storm, then do me a favor. Tap that subscribe button, like you're nodding along at a campfire tale. There's more where this came from: stories of forgotten heroes, frontier justice, and the kind of love that's measured in calloused hands and quiet sunrises. The West wasn't won in a day, and we ain't done telling its truths. Saddle up and stay a while. Next week, we're riding deep into the legend of the Cherokee schoolmarm who outdrew the Dalton gang. Until then, keep your powder dry and your heart open. This is Wild West Stories, signing off.